have to say, without a doubt, I've been doing this for a long time. Economics are fine, but you don't get good economics without good management. So I want to start up with the management of rotational grazing, making sure that people understand what it takes to set up a viable rotational grazing farm for a profitable system. And these are my observations doing this. I've been writing grazing plans strictly since, I shouldn't say strictly, but I've written a lot of grazing plans. I've counted them up, and I think I'm over 300 now, successful implemented grazing plans, which is a lot of fun. There's been some failures and there's been some difficulties, but you know, you learn a lot, you see a lot, and these are my observations. One of my favorite sayings, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right. So here's the short of it. If you want to graze and you want to graze successfully, and you are bound and determined that you want to graze successfully, you're probably going to be successful. If you come into grazing because this is the last ditch opportunity, I just don't know, that's a really big hurdle to get across. And I like what Justin was saying, where he just pushed through and he got that. There's a learning curve with grazing. There's something that I need to point out with Wisconsin agriculture, and we've done it over the last 100 years, where we've spent time putting animals onto concrete and putting them into more confinement type of systems. I'm pro-ag. Like, if we want to go to confinement, we go anyway. I'm not going to make a judgment either way. I'm just talking about grazing economics right now. But if you take a guy who's been scraping manure into a manure pit, or understands how to scrape manure for his entire life, and his dad taught him how to do that, there's a mental switch that has to happen if you want to be a successful rotational grazer. And I've seen this a lot, actually, and you have to understand how these systems work, because it's not just putting animals on grass. I mean, it can be that easy, but if you want to really get the most out of it, there are some things that you need to understand. And they're pretty simple things. You just need to be consistent about it, but you need to get your mind wrapped around that if you want to be successful with it. So how do you set up a successful grazing system? That's what I was going to say. I'm going to start with the system, and we'll talk a little bit about what I've seen for economics. Proper layout with considerations to animal husbandry. Like, wherever you are, I don't know if you've got nothing, if you've just got bare open fields, if you've got a system that's already established, you need to think about how you want to manage these animals and how you're going to rotate them, so that way you're not spending a ton of time every single day managing animals. One of the great benefits of rotational grazing is labor savings. However, I've seen a ton of fence designs, I've seen a ton of systems set up that are just extreme nightmares to manage. We're talking more work to do it. The other thing that I want to point out with grazing, if you're like a dairy, for instance, kind of jumping in halfway. It's like, it's good to try it and get into it and get the experience of it, but there's a curve there, I guess. I don't know what to say. Where if you are a grazer and a confinement operator, or you're a beef guy who's got a confinement operation, you want to go to grazing, and if you're going to do, I'm just going to try half my animals, and then you're going to try the other half over here. Now you've basically doubled your work. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't step into it a little bit, but there is a bit of time there where labor and the efficiencies that you can get from grazing are greatly reduced as you transition into that. So when I say animal husbandry and getting set up with that, so you got a system that's easy, you need to consider how you want to do that if that's the direction you want to go. Labor efficiency, we just talked about it. How intensive do you want to graze? Are you going to move your animals every 12 hours? You're going to move them every once a week, you know? There's a big difference about what that actually means in the long run. A lot of people don't understand that, and if you do get into rotational grazing, I got some slides later about this, but understanding the way grass growth is extremely important. And when I get to the grass growth curves, I'll show you that, but that's just something you need to really recognize if you want to be profitable in these systems. Are you going to machine harvest? Like, if you set up a whole bunch of pastures, you got 100 acres, and you make 100 one-acre pastures, that is impossible to take any type of equipment out there and manage that effectively. So if you've got the ability to stick polywire out there and break that down into little subdivisions, keep them long and narrow, keep the ends open, so that way you can set that 100 acres up, so that way you can take any size of equipment out there and manage that, cut a crop of hay off of there, while still having the ability to take your animals out there and graze it off. So you've got the best of both worlds now. And the best part about that is, if you've got your animals out there harvesting and you're able to manage the grass so that's productive and high quality, The same quality grass that you're cutting and putting into a silo or into a bag, if your animals can cut that for you or harvest that for you, think about what you gain in not having to turn the tractor on economically. Movement. This is something, you know, with the great thing about fence and gates, you can put a gate anywhere. There is something to really be said about not being scared to put a gate somewhere. So animal movement, you know, there are ways that animals flow, and you need to recognize that. And I would strongly recognize or talk to somebody like Justin, an experienced grazer. If you get a plan from somebody with the NRCS, or if you're working with me, get a second opinion on that, because you don't want to dead-end animals. And you need to understand how those animals like to flow. There are ways to make the animals work for you, and understanding what a cow does and how to make a cow move will make the whole system better. I used to raise steers with my animals and animal movement, you know, animal husbandry. I weighed some steers after we got done vaccinating them, and the stress that goes through these systems. If you're selling pounds of animal, you're selling rate of gain. If you lose 20 or 30 pounds because of the stress that you put those animals through, that is a hit to your pocket, especially when you're talking about meat animals. So husbandry, stress-free systems, those are really things to consider in making these systems work. Water is essential for the type of grazing that I'm talking about that I really see a huge economic impact on. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but if you've got one water source in the middle of your farm, you've got 100 acres. This is a really easy question, and anyone's going to answer this for me. And you just do, like, say 5 big paddocks or 7 big paddocks, because you're going to rotate them, but you've only got that one water source. Where are those cows going to be standing on June 21st at 1 o'clock in the afternoon? I can guarantee where they're going to be standing. Right by the water, right by the tank. So a portable system, think about what that does from the standpoint of being able to move nutrients across your farm. That's a big deal, because that NP and K that those cows are spreading for you is something that you don't have to spread that. So if you start thinking about that in the beginning, think about what that means across 7, 8, 9, 10 years of managing nutrients across the entire operation. And you can really get good dispersal of manure and urine, and even just the, you know, grazing breakdown of material, because it's been managed more universally and uniformly. And landscape, Justin talked a little bit about landscape. That's obviously something that you have to work with, so that's why I said work with someone who knows what they're doing if you want to set these plans up. This is a fun one. Lisa knows where this is. This is one of my favorite pictures, because this really illustrates some things here, and I wish I had a pointer, I don't. So this is a simplified layout of a farm, right? This is an actual grazing farm. You can see those little dots, that's from bale grazing in the wintertime. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Look at how strategically placed those bales are. When I talk about manure being spread, in 1 year, he went from having his cows on a lot and having to haul all his manure out to the field to having everything pre-placed on the field, and he reduced his labor costs significantly. We're talking the tune, I work with people who bale graze, who have 300 plus animals. Unfortunately, after like 20, it doesn't really matter, like it's about the same amount of work. Like you're talking 4 or 5 hours of actual labor a month to feed these animals. Now that's not talking about the time that you spend going out there looking and making sure that these animals are healthy. I'm talking about actual labor a month. Take that from the other standpoint, where I'm working with gentlemen who have 30 beef cows in a tie stall barn. And I'm not trying to judge anyone's situation here of how they want to raise animals, but 30 beef cows in a tie stall barn, 4 hours of labor a day, and they're putting that manure into a slurry story. They're spreading it, they're outside, and everyone's very concerned about animals being outside in the wintertime, which you should be. I'd be more concerned about fall mud and spring mud than negative 50 degrees. So those are things to really consider if you do want to go this direction. But animal health, I love it, because I talk to guys who've been doing this, and animals outside in the wintertime are super healthy. You don't have pneumonia, you don't have the hoof issues, it just works really great. In addition to the fact that they're spreading the manure. The other thing that you don't get when you've got animals on a lot is you don't get the urine. So now you've got the manure and you've got the urine, it's all spread across your field. And if you set this up, so you move those winter areas every single year, what does that mean for you as far as fertilization? And then if you times that by the fact where maybe you're gonna buy your hay in, and there's a balance there. You gotta figure out what the balance is for your farm. But you can buy hay into your property and credit that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So that's hay you didn't have to make, but because you spread it and you didn't put it on one spot, now you're fertilizing your land as well. So these are all little things that build onto themselves when I talk about seeing these systems that are economically feasible and actually making money. So fences, we're going to talk a little bit about systems here first to get going with it. The interesting thing about systems for me, fencing, water lines, lanes, all this stuff, it's all important to somebody who's new. I mean, those are all super important investments to get people started into it. But as you get into rotational grazing, you find out that that is the least important part, even though that seems like it should be the most important part. You know, we got these different fencing systems. These are just basic breakdowns, you know, smooth wire, not electric. We don't do a lot of this. I've done a few of these. I don't ever recommend them for sheep and goats. Funny thing about sheep and goats is, you know, I've seen them controlled with a 1-strand polywire, and I've also seen them not be able to be maintained in a 6-foot woven wire fence. So it really depends on the flock or the herd that you're dealing with. So you need to understand what your animals are and where you're at with that. But these are just basic rundowns of what we got there. We got the barbed wire fencing. That works really good where you don't have electricity. This is the one that I like the most. This electric high tensile fence. It's a mental barrier. It's easy, it's cheap. If you work with NRCS through cost sharing, we can actually get this installed for a very reasonable rate for you. But the thing about this is the flexibility that this can offer you as a producer is amazing. So if you are thinking about rotational grazing, you need to talk to your NRCS office. We don't guarantee fence, but we do take applications and we love to work with rotational grazing. What NRCS cares about is the fact that we have got this ability to put out buffers like this pasture, a well-managed pasture is the absolute best filter that nature has. So now as the NRCS, we can double down. We've got an amazing buffer. We've got an ability for a producer to make a lot of money, or at least not lose money, and we can help them. The goal of NRCS is that buffer. So if you do want to work with us, you have to understand that there is management required for that. We need that. You get the fencing, you get the water line, you get the lanes, if you get the contract with us, but you need to follow the plan that we're looking for. Temporary fences, this is just a picture of a temporary fence being rolled up, super portable. I've worked with temporary fences my whole life. If animals understand the electric fences, they will respect polywire. What's great about that is you can put polywire on any single field you got. You put a post on each end and run some stepping posts, and all of a sudden you've got another 100 acres of fence. And why I love this, and when we're starting to do more, and we start talking profitability down the road, this is a great way to implement longer-term grazing with a lot of the cover crops. I think there's a huge opportunity that needs to be looked at in Wisconsin with the cover crops going in from the cash crop side of things, and then also we've got all these grazers that are around the area. If you can team up with a producer that's growing cover crops, and you've got your animals there and he doesn't have animals, those cover crops cycle through those animals, have broken that manure or those nutrients down faster, so it's a win for him for those animals out there. So if you can work that situation out to everyone's benefit, there's an opportunity there. And a little bit of polywire and a little bit of respect with fence, and you're in business. Things to remember about a fence. Keep them as simple as possible. Keep it flexible. A good fence doesn't make you a good grazer. We've built a lot of good fences, and we're working with a lot of grazers, and you know, what I've seen is you can give the exact same soil type, the exact same layout to 2 different people, and it's amazing to see the results after 2 years, which is why it comes back down to management and what that's going to be. And the ultimate goal is to maximize dry matter production. This is something that if you want to make money grazing, you need to understand how grass grows. So an Energizer is the backbone of your system. Buy a good unit, make sure it's properly grounded, and purchase a larger one than you need, but don't go crazy. You know, there is something to be said and concerned about stray voltage, so get a little bit bigger than you want. We recommend 1 joule of fence per mile of electric or energized fence. Watering system. This is the cool thing about a watering system. If you've got water where the animals are, you don't need to have a lot of it. The other cool thing that happens there with these portable systems, if you've got a big tank, water gets hot, you got black line, water gets hot. But if they're drinking it, that water cycling and it's cool, and the other thing about that is you don't get these dead spots and you're able to move it around. So it really comes down to what you want for labor and what's going to work well for you. But being able to move these systems around has multiple benefits. The biggest one I come back to is that nutrient dispersal. Because if you've got permanent tanks that aren't portable, think of, I call it nutrient translocation. Those cows are going back to that tank all the time for 3, 4, 5, 10 years. You can see that in a soil test, just what that's doing. But if you've got this tank and you've got a pipeline set up that you can move this around and you put a 50-foot hose in this, you can swing that and you can move that through your pastures. And the long-term benefits are really fun to see. So watering systems, unless you allow the water or livestock to come back to a central site like a milking site, you have to have water in the pasture if you want a rotationally graze successful. Water is many times a limiting factor in production. You know, if cows are thirsty, they're not going to eat as much. If they're losing weight because they're heat stressed, you got to have water out there. And if you won't drink the water, don't make your livestock drink it. So I get asked all the time about ponds and pastures and if that's a good thing or not. And I always like to take my answers back to my observations, but I like to tie those back to university studies too, because we want science behind the decisions we're making. And there is proof that shows that animals drink more water when it's clean than out of a pond. This is the big permanent one. You see a lot of these out west, or you see these where you don't have a lot of water flowing to each storage. You know, I'm not against these, but just understand with everything there's a give and take. So, you know, if this is what works for you because you don't want to deal with water, that's cool. And I'm not here to tell you not to do it, but just understand that you do lose a little bit. On the other side, just the same way. You gain the nutrient benefit, but you gain the labor as well. So you got to figure out what's going to work for you. The biggest thing though with all this water is it helps you manage grass. And that's where you get the money or the impact from grazing. This is a winter water. I love these. It's probably my favorite one. There's a bunch of other good ones out there. But this one has been probably the least problematic that we've worked with. No electricity, in the middle of the pasture, wind chills -40, and the only thing the guy did to keep it from freezing up was set a bale of hay over the top of it at night. During the day when the cows were drinking out of it, it worked fine. This one, you wouldn't need to do the hay. It's kind of a standalone, let it be, you're good to go. I always recommend electricity if it's not too expensive. This is just some pipeline. This is the black stuff. We lay this up under every other piece of fence. You need that in order to be successful when you graze. This is how we get the water out to the field. And NRCS will do some engineering to make sure that we can push water there. You know, if we can't make it go through 1-inch pipe, we'll put inch pipe on there or 1.5-inch pipe on there. We get water. You need to make sure that water's there and available, because especially with those portable tanks, they will tip them over. And if you've got 200 animals that are thirsty and you're trying to fill up a tank with a trickle of water, you're gonna have a miserable day. So I talk about this stuff because even though that's maybe not part of the economics of it, if you don't like it, you're not going to stick with it, and you're not going to see the other benefits of it. So you need to understand those nuances to make this easy and fun so you can spend the time on what's going to get you to that point where you can be really successful with this. So we got to talk about economics here. That's what this is about. And in my opinion, the top things for economic viability successful. Number one, days on pasture, and this is what I was getting at before. Every day you graze is money in your pocket. And I've got some stuff to show you, but the reality is if you own the land, you've got the equipment, you've got all that. That's there no matter what, right? And if you can put the same quality of feed in that animal without turning the key on, even if you just think about gas savings alone, that's a big deal. And the other one is maintaining proper residual. This is what people really need to understand, because this will limit your ability to graze a long time. If you don't keep that grass so that there's leaf blade there, you're gonna run out of grass no matter what that plan says, because July and August happen. If you graze that so there's no leaf there and you're thinking about taking that off like a hay crop, it doesn't work as well. Now on the flip side, if you understand how grass grows and you can leave that leaf blade there, I've done a lot of clippings. I throw a hoop in alfalfa fields, on pastures. I can say without any hesitation that 95% of the time, a well-managed pasture has always beat the alfalfa field that's just across the fence in dry matter production per acre across the yield. Now the key difference here though is with grazing, they're grazing it 6 to 8 times a year, 5 to 8 times a year depending on how good it is. So you're taking 2 more harvests off basically. So if you leave a little bit on the bottom and that makes that grass jump start to the next one, think about how you're getting more going on. The other thing that people don't think about is density. So with grazing, we're not taking it off at 2 feet. We're taking it off at 12, 15, 16 inches. And if you look at the difference in sunlight that gets down the soil, we've got a much denser stand, and there's more yield or more dry matter in a dense stand than there is in a tall stand. And you can prove it yourself. And I love alfalfa, but look at any alfalfa field right now, and then go to a pasture. Here's some other things to consider for economic: winter management, spring management we talked about. We talked a little bit about that. Death loss for beef animals, calving with the seasons. So there's a lot of research that shows that calving on pasture is way more beneficial than trying to calve in the fall. These calves that are born with pasture, the cows go through the winter a lot easier, and we've got a lot more live animals at the end of the year. These are some interesting figures. They're a little dated right now, and it's only gone up, but 2007 it cost $1,300 to raise a heifer. 2013, $2,200 to raise a heifer. So this is for the dairy end of things. And you break down what that number is for that 2000, 57% of your cost is feed. And then the next biggest one is labor and management. So when I was talking before about saving money and putting money in your pocket, if you can cut those costs in half by putting them on pasture instead of turning on the key to the tractor and storing the feed and bringing them into there, that's almost 3/4 of your operating costs that you can take out of the equation. It's not as simple as that, obviously, and you have to understand your own numbers, but you can just see how easy that is. The key there is management. You need to make sure that the pasture that you're putting out there is as good a quality or better, and that's achievable. And I've seen it, I've done it, I work with people doing it every single year. You just need to understand how grass grows. And I want to go back now to this. All right, I can't point at this, but we're going to look at this bottom chunk here. All right, this little piece here, right there, and then this piece right here. All right. With our cool season, a lot of books will tell you to graze no more than, or graze down, don't take it any lower than 3 inches. And that's good for a lot of the cool season grasses like the annual ryegrasses. The reality is in northern Wisconsin, where most of us call home, that's not the best recommendation from my observation. And I know this because I've taken clippings. My recommendation with pasture grasses that we're typically grazing is going to be 4 to 6 inches. So leave that more residual there. So you lose that little bit on the bottom, which tends to not be the best in quality. And so what? We're going to come back and we're graze. It's not like it's going anywhere. But look at what happens with this grass growth curve, all right? So if you're grazing that and you've left that little bit there, and now this grass is growing exponentially as fast as you can come back onto it quicker, that's where I'm talking 6, 7. I've had people get 8 grazings off of fields. The numbers that I'm getting when I'm measuring this grass is pretty phenomenal. Like, it's blowing alfalfa away. But you need to be a manager and understand how this works, all right? The other cool thing, like I said about this, if you're grazing this in this period where it's growing exponentially, but you're taking it before most people would take hay off, you've got a thicker stand because, like I said, you've got more sunlight getting down into that. And I've taken forage samples on this. Like, this is not heifer feed, this is not beef feed, this is dairy quality feed if you want to be. It's all about management. So these are actual studies done at the University of Wisconsin, pastured versus confined. The pastured animals, 11-year average, had an average daily gain pounds per head per day of 1.97, which is 1.1 pounds greater than if you put them in confinement. So people who say that you can't get good animals off of pasture, that's completely incorrect. It's all about management. And then this is industry standard. So pastured versus the industry target. So we're above the industry target. So there might be an argument to be made to maybe let the pastures grow a little bit longer so they're not quite so rich because you don't want fat heifers coming into the buildings. Either way, if you put those animals out on pasture, it's athletic, they get their hooves going on, things just start working really nice. I mean, just compare it to yourself. If you're standing on concrete all day, it does impact you. And then here's the other one that I really like. So economics, milk per pounds per head for a 305-day lactation. So 1,900 more pounds off of heifers off of pasture. This did not carry through once they're in the free stall barn and milking. This is just That's the benefit that they saw after pasture. That's almost 2,000 pounds more milk or a 7.5% increase. What does that mean with 100 head of animals? It means just by putting them out there, taking the same quality feed off, not sacrificing feed, and if you manage it right, you're gonna get more feed per acre, and you get $30,000 more dollars. So why graze? Reduces operating costs. There's health benefits to the animals, environmental benefits, which is why the NRCS is very interested in rotational grazing, and then cattle health.